Uh-oh. Motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. You might have heard earlier today, a very disgruntled Savannah Marshall pulls out of BOXXER all-female card after being left, quote-unquote, humiliated by the promoter. Savannah Marshall will no longer fight on the all-female card scheduled for March 7th at the Royal Albert Hall due to a dispute with BOXXER. A disgruntled Savannah Marshall took to Instagram to share her side of the story and took aim at BOXXER, fronted by Ben Shalom, who are running the card. She wrote, "I was told I was fighting on the March 7th on the all-female card for BOXXER. Opponent agreed, and I have been in camp for the past few weeks. I was also asked to travel to London for the press conference, where I was told my fight would be announced. Instead, I was sidelined and left feeling humiliated and confused. I honestly thought I would have been treated with a bit more respect. Due to disputes with BOXXER, I will not be fighting on March 7th. A familiar tune we heard young Francesca Hennessy singing not that long ago about that same show."
I got told to come to the presser today that I'm going to be announced on the card, and I've come here and I don't really know what's going on. I don't know why I'm here, but I haven't been announced. So I was told weeks ago I was fighting on this card. Yeah, weeks ago. So I'm just a bit annoyed, to be honest. I've been brought here today. I feel a bit disrespected. I feel like, look, if it was at the start of my career, I'd be like, do you know what? But I feel like in my career I've proven myself time and time again. And, you know, I get it if I was asking for an easy touch on this card. I'm not. In fact, I was going to fight a world champion, which was agreed on both ends. And for some reason it's not come through. So we're all struggling to figure out what's actually going on here.
Yeah, it's just like all up in the air. It's like a bit of a shambles, to be honest. Again, they got Savannah Marshall all the way down from Newcastle. She's not even on the top table as well. Like, what? I can't see.
What she's done for women's boxing as well.
She made this.
Sound familiar? Almost identical to what Savannah Marshall is saying. The super middleweight fighter has been inactive since becoming undisputed champion back in July of 2023 when she defeated Franchon Cruz Dezern via a majority decision. A subsequent injury forced her to relinquish her WBC, WBA, and WBO titles, a decision that upset Marshall, who now only holds the IBF title from her undisputed fight. Her dispute with BOXXER comes as a shock after Marshall praised the promoters for pushing women's boxing, having staged the October 2022 all-female card that she headlined in her defeat to Clarissa Shields. She drew in over 2 million viewers on Sky Sports. Speaking to Boxing Now last week, she said, "It's nice to see BOXXER really the only broadcaster and promoter that's pushing female boxing. You don't really see it from the other ones. I think she's now experiencing buyer's remorse for endorsing BOXXER as a promoter who has so left her out in the cold." And that's not even true. It's not even true that BOXXER is the only major promotional outfit pushing the women. MVP does a fantastic job of pushing the women. They've even signed 1 or 2 new female fighters. And of course, Matchroom, who are really the ones who got the ball rolling. And that's the void that BOXXER is still trying to fill, the one that Matchroom left behind when they left Sky Sports for DAZN. Let's be honest, the big boom in women's boxing we've been seeing the last 7 or 8 years has everything to do with Matchroom's efforts. On behalf of Katie Taylor and the other women boxers they signed thereafter, one of which was Savannah Marshall, who made a decision to leave Matchroom for BOXXER. Now, whether or not that was the right decision can be measured against what she is now saying. Now, why specifically Savannah Marshall and Francesca Hennessy have been left out in the cold pertaining to a show they were supposed to be boxing on. BOXXER's limited resources, perhaps, or Ben Shalom's inability to get it together. In truth, he's been in over his head from the very beginning, and I said as much, that he's got some stiff competition. You've got Frank Warren on one end and Eddie Hearn on the other, both of which have more established stables than what Ben brings to the table.
Established track records.
That if you thought about the inception of BOXXER and the role they were trying to fulfill on Sky Sports, it was always going to be this way because they never had enough to compete. While I applaud BOXXER's efforts on behalf of the women and what they've been trying to do, what did they have that was going to compete with Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua, Conor Benn?
They were always in over their head.
And it didn't help that their standout amateur, their star Olympian Fraser Clark, got demolished by Flavio Wardley.
Crawford.
So when I see that their latest presser is described as being in shambles by those summoned to be there, I can't help but wonder if Ben and BOXXER are starting to unravel due to a wavering commitment from Sky.
Wells running dry.
Limited resources, perhaps, from Sky, or just flat-out ineptitude from Ben.
Neither would surprise me.
I now only wonder whether or not Savannah Marshall has the kind of autonomy that might allow her to go somewhere else. Say back over to Matchroom or maybe over to Queensbury like her old buddy Chantel Cameron did.
You don't like what's going on at BOXXER? Leave, if you can.
Or maybe Ben Shalom can work a little bit harder to smooth things over with what are his disgruntled fighters.
It's bad optics.
One fighter saying one thing is just one thing, but two of them saying the same thing is quite another.
And it all looks bad on him.
He's in over his head, and I've been saying that from the very beginning. In men's super middleweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now the story that broke late yesterday. Apparently, Canelo versus Crawford is off. And the exact reason still escapes us, but I'm not rushing to assumption or jumping to conclusions because sooner or later somebody's going to ask Terrence what happened, somebody's going to ask Turkey, somebody's going to ask Canelo, and we'll get those answers. And based on what those answers are, we can start to assign blame.
Though some already have.
Slack-jawed gawkers and buffoons, the usual suspects that are already blaming Canelo Alvarez for the fight's collapse without knowing what's going on. In truth, these are people who already didn't like Canelo, so of course, they're gonna rush to the assumption that it's his fault. And maybe it is.
But you don't know that yet, and you already made up your mind.
None of us do. We don't know what happened here, but you're already taking a side because, well, you were already on that side. Boxing insider Rick Glacier stated, with Ring Magazine reporting that the fight with Canelo and Crawford is now off, it's probably that Canelo priced himself out, as there are always limits to what one will pay.
And that is one possibility, that Canelo's asking price was well in excess of what Turkey was willing to give him.
Turkey LL Sheikh is no different than any other quality businessman. There is a limit to what something is worth. Canelo ducked David Benavidez, and now looks like Canelo is also ducking Terrence Crawford.
That's where he loses me.
Canelo pricing himself out of the fight is a distinct possibility, but the same is true in reverse. What if it was Terrence that priced himself out? What if he wanted too much?
You're already making this Canelo Alvarez's fault without knowing why exactly the fight collapsed.
Irrespective of who's to blame, if they're not fighting each other in September and delivering the boxing community at large that fight, well, now this puts pressure on the both of them to come up with a substitute. And Jake Paul is not a substitute. I was only okay with a Jake Paul excursion en route to a Terrence Crawford fight. But I'm not okay with you swapping out Terrence for Jake. I'm not all right with that.
And I understand that a Jake Paul fight pays a lot of money, perhaps more than a Terrence Crawford fight, but I'm not seeing any of that money, so that's little compensation to the consumer.
Irrespective of who's to blame for this fight's collapse, whether it's Canelo's fault or Terrence Crawford's fault, Jake Paul is just not a substitute.
Those are bad optics for Canelo if we end up with Jake in September instead of Crawford in September, as some people actually thought Terrence Crawford could win.
Even if you don't agree with them, it was perceived as being more of a contest between two highly esteemed professionals and not a novice, an influencer, moonlighting as a boxer.
Irrespective of what it pays, that's little consolation for people who were expecting to see a high-level fight in September.
For Crawford, It puts pressure on him too, Crawford, who's 37 going on 38 years old, and he's not getting any younger, that if you are now not fighting Canelo, who are you going to fight? Are you going to go on an undisputed run at junior middle? Because that's really your only alternative. A fight with either Sebastian Fundora or Bakram Murtazaliev next. Are you going to go after them since you're not fighting Canelo?
The story was that Terence wasn't going to fight in between now and September, in between now and the time he fights Canelo. He wasn't going to take a fight in between. If you're not fighting Canelo anymore...
Does that alter the plan? Can we expect to see Terence Crawford return to action sooner rather than later, since he's not charting a course north of 154? Can we see him in the spring, in the summer, or does he not fight altogether and calls it a career? Does he retire?
Questions that need answers.
And what I thought was the most level-headed reaction to this fight's collapse, Marcos Villegas, who said, "Seeing people speculate it's Canelo's fault for the fight not happening, we've got to wait and see what it could be the other way around. We don't know anything yet." It's not even about going up to bat for Canelo Alvarez and defending him against his critics. Put simply, we don't know where anything went wrong. So how do we naturally assume that all of this is Canelo's fault? What it is misplaced anger, redirected at Canelo for not fighting David Benavidez.
They were already angry at him for that, so that when this fight collapses, they're going to be angry at him for that too, even if they don't know if it's his fault.
They'll make it his fault because they're already angry with him. So whether it's Canelo's fault or Crawford's fault, either way you slice it, there is now added pressure on them to deliver some form of a substitute, something to satisfy the fans that were anticipating this fight. You're going to have to come up with something else.
Unless they can make amends.
Remember that you're talking about a fight that's supposed to go down all the way out there in September. There's plenty of time to come back to the negotiation table, right the wrongs, make amends, and make it happen. There's still time, which would render this much ado about nothing.
If they do end up making amends.
Though, without any concrete answers at this time, I will hold off on assigning blame because I don't know who to blame.
Though I've already heard some preliminary rumblings, I will not allude to them at this time until I get confirmation elsewhere.
That confirmation might come just as this video is being uploaded, but I, unlike so many others, will not rush to assumption. In men's heavyweight news, a peculiar story I came across yesterday, Alexander Povetkin, who's retired, has now been banned for 4 years, and 10 years of fight results have now been revoked. The ITA, the International Testing Agency, who I never heard of before yesterday, have announced that Alexander Povetkin has been banned for 4 years, and all of his results from October 24th, 2014 until the start of the athlete's provisional suspension on October 21st of 2024 have been disqualified, including the results obtained during a boxing match held on the night of October 24, 25, and 2014. This is due to an investigation which uncovered the previously unreported presence of banned substance Osterin in a sample provided by Povetkin in 2014. Povetkin's wins that have been affected by the ruling are the win over Carlos Takam, Mike Perez, Marius Vach, Johan Duapa, Andrei Rudenko, Christian Hammer, David Price, Huey Fury,
Dillian Veit.
My reaction to this story is, banning an already retired fighter that wasn't fighting is largely ceremonial. It doesn't accomplish anything. Now, perhaps Povetkin had some desire to mount some form of a comeback when you're seeing fighters like Kubrat Pulev are still around and Vladimir Klitschko is rumored to be making a comeback. Maybe Alexander wanted to make a comeback and they've halted that effort. Maybe it's something like that, but my reaction is the damage is already done. Banning him now, after the fact, doesn't solve anything, doesn't fix anything.
It's pointless.
Veteran promoter Lou Dibella took this as an opportunity to stand on his soapbox and start preaching about the evils of doping in the sport, saying, "Steroid testing in boxing is an effing joke. WBC program included. The WBC subjective, we can do whatever we want rules were exactly the reason for the court overturning the $4 million judgment of the jury."
What's he talking about?
Wilder's case against Povetkin after Povetkin tested positive for a banned substance, thereby canceling their fight. That's what Lou's talking about. Lou continued, "Effing cheater, steroid monster Povetkin was rewarded his biggest career purse thereafter, rewarded by the WBC and boxing after being a known cheat. Can you believe this cheater piece of shit Povetkin and the pieces of shit around him sued me for defaming his filthy, lying, worthless name? Aside of Lou's accusation, being complicit with doping in the sport, Mauricio Suleiman himself of the WBC said, "Lou, keep your anger towards whomever you want, but don't take it into the WBC." To which Lou responded, "I can have whatever anger, frustration, or disappointment I want. Whoever, Mauricio, I don't work for you, brother, and I am stating a fact. Anyone who takes the time to read the judge's decision in the Wilder vs. Povetkin matter knows I am simply telling the truth. No steroid testing in boxing, including the WBC program, has any teeth."
My reaction.
It's not that Lou Dibella is wrong in his assertions, so much as he's just another guy in boxing throwing stones at a glass house, because if what you're alleging is that the World Boxing Council is complicit with doping in the sport, then so are you. 2 of your own fighters tested positive for banned substances, and you stood by them.
Same as everybody else does in this situation, and all their lofty explanations.
When Heather Hardy tested positive for a banned substance after the Amanda Serrano fight, when Hannah Gabriel's tested positive for one ahead of the Clarissa Shields rematch. Why do you think it got canceled? It's because Hannah tested positive for a banned substance, so that Lou Dibella can now turn around, standing on his soapbox, preaching about the evils of doping in the sport.
You're just as complicit as they are.
Those are your fighters. And what about Jean Pascal? After Jean Pascal tested positive for not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 banned substances, who do you think started working with him right after that? Lou Dibella.
You didn't stand on principle then, so don't try to do the Sally Struthers act now.
Won't somebody please think about the fighters?
Please.
And the main problem with Lou's critique that the World Boxing Council's clean boxing program has no teeth is you're expecting them to foot the bill, foot the cost for what are the promoters of shows. The reason that anti-doping in the sport isn't more universal is because the money's got to come from somewhere. Ask yourself a question. When Lou Dibella does a Broadway boxing show, are those fighters being tested?
Is there VADA testing for those shows?
VADA testing isn't free. In a very general sense, anti-doping testing of any kind isn't free. It costs, and it's expensive. The fighters may not have the money to foot the bill, and the promoters...
If they had to pay for anti-doping testing for every fighter during every show they put on...
Yikes.
Putting on shows would become a lot more expensive.
So unless you're implementing anti-doping testing for every show you put on involving every fighter, you're in no position to talk. And Lou Dibella certainly isn't.
Povetkin was a drug cheat.
Not saying that he wasn't, but without an exact number as to how many fighters in the sport right now might be using something, we don't even know if we should castigate him.
What if he's just one fighter trying to keep up with the Joneses in what is a very dirty sport?
Boxing's dirty little secret, that underneath it all, they all know what's going on and they're all complicit. And thus, taking a hardline stance against doping in the sport is little more than just a disguise, to avert eyes and attention away from yourself, and how you're a party to it too.
You pick and choose when you want to let this bother you.
Leaving the boxing fans confused and unsure of how they should feel.
You're the ones giving us mixed signals.